At 68,
Bo
the
Derek,
woman the world
forever
once
etched in the
measured with
memory of
numbers
millions
lives
for her
far
role as
beyond
Jenny
them.
Hanley in
Time
the film
has settled
10
gently into
was
the
not only
lines
the
at the
embodiment
corners of
beauty
Bo
and
Derek's
innocence.
eyes,
She was the
softening
dream
what
that stirred an
fame once
entire
carved
generation.
in sharp relief.
Whenever they saw her on
She
screen,
moves more
for
quietly now,
decades, she wore
but
the
the
crown
echoes
of
of the
perfection.
girl she used to
The
be
title of
still
perfect
live in
10
every
that the world
silence,
celebrated.
every breath she
Yet it was
takes
also
when the
title
world
that
isn't
cruelly stole
watching.
her soul.
Once, she
Behind
was a
those
vision
legendary
running along
cornrow
a
braids
sunlit
and
shore,
the smile that
the
enchanted
perfect
millions
10
lies a
framed in
secret Hollywood
celluloid
has never
forever.
revealed.
Now,
What
she
seemed
is a
like
woman who
paradise
has walked
turned
through
into a gilded
storms
cage,
the camera never
where love
caught,
and power
carrying
intertwined
a
so
lifetime
tightly
of light
that
and
even her
shadow
reflection
in equal
no longer
measure.
felt her
2
own.
millions.
And now,
She will always
at
be that
68,
shimmering figure
what
in motion,
storms still
an
haunt her?
image that slipped
Before
into
we begin,
dreams and
if
stayed
the
there,
beauty and strength of Bo Derek
But
have ever
behind
touched your
that
heart,
immortal moment
leave a
is
light
another
as a
story,
quiet tribute
one
to
that
the woman who
began
has
long
lived her
before the
entire life
braids,
between
the
light
fame,
and
the
shadow.
whispers. It
The most
began with a
haunting
little
chapters of
girl
Bo
who
Derek's
learned
life didn't
too early
unfold
that
beneath the
beauty
glow
can
of
be a
Hollywood
mask.
cameras,
Bad and
but in the
home
still,
can break
salt-soaked
without warning
quiet
before
of a
the
small house in
studios,
Long Beach,
before
where
the
silence
posters
wasn't
and the
peace.
perfect
It was
stills.
the sound
There
of something
was
slowly
a
breaking.
small house holding
Born
more
on November
silence
20th,
than laughter.
1956,
She came into
she
the
entered a
world
world
on
split
November
between glamour and
20th,
isolation.
1956,
Her mother, Norma,
with a name
was a
few
Hollywood
remember
makeup
now,
artist,
Mary
beautiful,
Kathleen Collins.
meticulous, and often
The world
elsewhere.
she opened her eyes
father,
to was
Paul
split down the
Collins,
middle.
a Korean War
One
veteran
side
turned
painted
boat
with
builder,
the
was
illusions of
steady as the
glamour,
tide and just
the other
as
with
distant.
the ache of
And by
absence.
1962,
Her mother,
when Bo was
Norma,
6, the tide
crafted
had pulled them
faces for
apart
the
for good.
screen.
A rupture
A Hollywood
that shattered
makeup
the only
artist
foundation
who
she
knew
had
how
known.
to hide every
In the
blemish
weeks that
with a
followed,
whisper of
the air
powder
inside
and
the
color.
house grew
She
heavy and still,
was lovely,
as if the walls
precise,
themselves were
and
holding
often
their
gone.
breath.
Her
She
hours
remembered the
measured in
sound of
call
her father's
sheets
boots
and shooting
crossing the wooden
schedules
floor.
instead of
1,
bedtime
2,
stories.
3,
Her father,
and the soft
Paul
click
Collins,
of the door closing
had
behind
once
him,
worn a
gentle
uniform
as a
and
lie.
carried the weight of
He never
war.
came back.
Korean War
At
veteran
night,
who
she
traded
would crawl into
battlefields
her
for
mother's
boat
bed,
hulls.
just to feel
He
where
built
warmth
things
used
that
to be.
floated, yet
The
seemed
sheets were
anchored
cold,
always somewhere
but they
far
were proof
away.
that love
He
had
was
once
steady,
lived there.
yes,
At school,
but steady
she
from a
told her friends her
distance.
father was away at
By
sea. A
1962,
story she told
when
so
Bo
many
was
times
only
she
6,
almost believed it.
that fragile
Pretending,
balance
she
shattered.
discovered, was easier
Whatever
than
had been
explaining.
holding her parents together
When her
finally
mother
gave way,
remarried Bobby Bass,
as brittle
a
as old
Hollywood
glass.
stuntman who threw
The
himself
house
from
that
burning
once
cars
hummed
for a
with
living,
ordinary noises,
danger replaced
a radio
discipline.
murmuring in
He
the
lived for
kitchen,
adrenaline.
the soft murmur
Bo
of
learned to live in
conversation
the silence
grew
that followed it.
unnaturally still.
At dinner,
The
they
air
spoke of
turned
cameras,
heavy, as
paychecks,
though the
and
walls
movie
themselves
sets.
knew
Never
something
of
was
her.
about to be taken
She
away.
discovered that being
She
quiet
remembered the
made
sound
adults
of his
forget you
boots on the
faster.
wooden floor,
Some nights,
a rhythm
she would
she
sit
could
by the
count.
window, counting
One step,
headlights on the road,
then another,
hoping one
then
might
another.
stop.
The
None
click of
ever
the
did.
door as it closed
The laughter
behind
of
him was
childhood
gentle,
faded into the rhythm
almost
of the waves
apologetic.
outside, and the
But the
ocean
gentlest
became her
exits
confidant.
can leave the
only
loudest
thing
emptiness.
vast enough
He
to listen.
did not come back.
I think I loved
In the nights
ocean,
that followed,
she would later
she
admit,
drifted down the
because it
hallway
never
like a
judged
ghost
me.
of herself,
It never asked me
small
to be perfect.
hands clutching a blanket
By
too thin to
1971,
hold off the
while
cold.
other girls her age
She
were
would
falling in
climb
love,
into her mother's
Bo was
bed,
falling into the Pacific.
searching for warmth
She spent her
that
days
seemed
on
to
the
have
sand,
vanished
salt
alongside
burning
the
her
man
lips,
who had
wind
once lifted
tangling her
her
hair,
onto his
a
shoulders.
surfboard taller than
The
herself
sheets felt
under her
cool
arm.
under her cheek,
The ocean
but they
became
held the
her
faint
teacher.
memory of comfort,
Wild, cruel,
proof that love had
forgiving.
lived there once,
One
even
evening,
if it had
she
slipped
walked into
away
the surf until
during
the water
the day.
rose to her chest.
When her classmates
cold, biting
asked
deep.
where her father was,
For a moment,
she
thought
discovered how
easy it would
quickly
be
a
to keep
story could
walking,
protect you.
to let the sea take
She
her.
told them he was
But
away
then
at
a wave
sea,
lifted her,
working,
and she realized
traveling,
she could float.
somewhere out
It was
beyond the
there,
horizon.
in that lonely baptism
She
of
said it
salt
so
and
many
silence,
times that,
Bo
for
Derek
moments
began
at
to
a time,
rise.
she nearly
Every
believed it
fracture,
herself.
every quiet heartbreak
Pretending,
was
she
already
found,
forging the
cost
steel
less
beneath her
than
beauty,
telling the truth.
shaping the woman
When
the
Norma
world would one day
remarried,
call
the
perfect.
script of Bo's childhood
And as she
changed
stood
again.
on the shore,
This time,
watching the tide
the man
erase her
who stepped
footprints,
into the frame
she didn't
was
yet
Bobby
know that
Bass.
beyond that
a Hollywood
horizon,
stuntman who
another
made a
kind
living
of tide
crashing
was
through
waiting.
glass, tumbling
One
from
called
burning
Hollywood.
cars.
where
letting
destiny
explosions
would come
bloom
wrapped in
behind
both
him
light
for the
and
sake
shadow.
of spectacle. C.
It's cruel
Where
how
Paul
the
had
quiet
been
after
distant
childhood can
and
sound like
solid,
fate calling
Bobby
your name.
carried danger into the
Bo
room
Derek's
like a
next
second
chapter
skin.
began not
He
with
chased
applause,
risk with a
but
grin.
with the low hum of
She learned
studio
to
lights
survive in the
and the faint
spaces
smell of
after it.
hairspray.
Dinner.
The kind her mother used
Conversations
every day
weren't about
while
feelings
painting
or
beauty
fears.
onto other people's
They
faces.
circled around cameras,
The ocean girl from
fees,
Long Beach,
directors,
who once thought waves could
and
fix
choreography,
now
the
stood under the
mechanics of
artificial
make-believe.
sun of Hollywood.
Not the fragile
It was
heart of a little girl
1973,
sitting
and
quietly at the
16-year-old
table.
Mary Kathleen Collins
Bo
still
realized
had
that
sea
silence
salt
could
crusted
make
on
her
skin.
invisible if
When
she
her mother
spoke
brought her
less.
to work at a
Adults
film set,
forgot to press,
cameras
to
clicked,
prod, to
directors
question.
shouted,
So
powder
she
drifted
shrank
in the air like
herself,
dust over a
folding
dream.
deeper into the
And somewhere
background,
in that noise,
listening more
one
than
man
talking.
looked up and saw her.
Some evenings,
John Derek
she would
was
sit by the
46,
window
tall,
while the sky
tan,
bled into
a
evening,
former actor
counting
turned
headlights
photographer
sweeping
whose charm
across
felt
the road.
rehearsed, yet
Each pair of
irresistible.
lights was a
He
possibility,
already had a
a
wife,
maybe,
television
a small
star Linda
miracle
Evans,
that never came.
and a life that glittered with the
The
kind
world
of power Bo
outside
had only
kept
seen in
moving.
magazines.
Inside, childhood
eyes met
laughter
hers,
faded
the air
until it
seemed
was
to
nothing
still.
more than a memory.
That face
What
belongs
filled
on
the
film,
void was
he
something
said.
larger,
And though the
older,
words were meant for casting,
patient
they
as the
landed
pull of the
like
moon,
a spell.
the ocean.
No one had ever
The
studied her
Pacific
that way
became the
before,
one constant
as if
that
she
did
were
not
not a
ask
person,
anything of her.
but a
Comb.
possibility.
Its
He
voice
spoke
reached their
softly,
world in
as
the
artists
steady
do
hush of
when they know
waves
the
against
power
the
of their
shore.
voice.
A
You
lullaby
have
that
something
never
rare,
lied.
he told her.
She would
Something no
walk
one can
toward
teach.
it whenever the
He
house
offered her a
felt too
role in a
small,
film to be shot
the
in
walls
Europe.
too close.
Once
The
upon a
sand
love,
clung between her
she
toes,
said yes
the
before
wind
she
tangled
understood
her
the
hair,
price.
and the
Greece
salt
glimmered
stung
like
the
a
corners of
postcard.
her eyes,
Whitewashed
disguising
walls,
tears she didn't want
wind-tossed
to
olive trees,
explain.
blue
Standing
water
at the
that seemed
edge
to
of the
stretch
water,
into forever.
she felt something
She left
watching her,
California behind.
not a person,
School,
not a camera,
friends,
but a
the last
vastness that
fragile outline
accepted
of
her
girlhood.
exactly as she was.
On the island,
B.
under the relentless
The ocean
sun,
didn't
he
demand
shaped every
perfection.
gesture she
Tit.
made.
It didn't
Don't
ask
act,
her
he
to
said.
smile.
Just
It
be.
simply waited.
And she obeyed.
As the years
Because
moved
she wanted
forward,
so badly to be
the
worthy
beach
of the way
became
he
her
looked at her.
sanctuary.
The
By
sea shimmered, the
1971,
camera rolled,
while other
and for a
girls at
while she
school
believed
giggled
she was
about
free.
crushes and prom
But whispers
dresses,
traveled
Bo
faster
was
than
racing the
Aegean
tide.
wind.
A
By the time
surfboard
the final
taller than
reel
she
spun,
was tucked
the
under
world
one
had
arm.
already rewritten her
She
story.
threw herself
The
into the
married
waves
director
the way
and the
some
teenage
people throw
muse,
themselves into
the
prayer.
runaway girl,
She learned
the
to read
scandal
the
in the
shifts
sun.
in the water,
Reporters
the moods
camped
of the
outside her
sea
mother's
when
house.
it would cradle her,
Cameras that
and
once
when it would
promised
punish.
beauty
Salt
now hunted
burned
her.
at her lips.
So he
The
took her
wind
further
knotted her
to
hair
Germany,
into wild
away from the
banners.
noise, the
Wipeouts left her
judgment,
gasping,
the law.
bruised, and
We're safer
exhilarated.
here, he told her.
The ocean was
And
harsh,
she believed
but
him,
it was honest.
because she still wanted
And
to
that
believe in
honesty
something.
felt kinder than
In Germany,
any polite
the rain
lie.
never stopped.
One
It
evening,
streaked across the
under
window
a
of
sky
their small
smudged with
apartment,
gray, she
washing
walked
color
deeper
out of
into the
everything.
surf than usual.
She learned to cook
The
for
water
two,
crept up
to
from
speak
her calves
softly,
to her waist,
disappear.
then to her chest,
Her passport
cold
was
enough
still damp
to
from
steal
the
her
night they
breath.
fled
Shore
California,
behind her,
ink
blurred,
bleeding where her name
growing
had been
smaller, less
She
certain.
rehearsed lines for a
For a
movie no
heartbeat,
one would ever see.
maybe two.
The money was gone.
A thought as
The
quiet as
reels
it was
locked away in a
terrifying
vault
slipped
somewhere
into
far
her
from
mind.
home.
How
The
simple
love
it would
story they
be to
filmed
keep
was sealed in
going.
darkness,
Let
along
the
with
sea swallow the
girl who played
noise,
it.
the ache,
Some nights
the
she
feeling
almost
of
called her
not
mother,
fitting anywhere.
but she never picked up
The
the
water
phone.
gripped her,
How do
icy
you
and
explain that your
indifferent,
dream has teeth?
and she felt the weight
She
of
was
everything
16,
she could not say.
living like someone twice
Then
her
a wave
age,
rose behind
already
her,
carrying the
taller
silence
than
of
the
women
rest,
much older.
and lifted her
When
off
she
her feet.
finally stood again before the sea,
For a moment she stopped
cold, gray
resisting
waters of
and
northern
simply
Europe,
let herself
she
float,
realized the
suspended
ocean no
between
longer
sky
sang to
and
her.
depth.
It
The
mourned
water
her.
cradled her
She had
instead
stepped
of
through
pulling
her
her
first
under.
door,
In
believing
that
it led to
weightless
freedom.
instant,
But
something
on the other
inside her
side waited a
shifted.
cage,
The same
gilded
ocean
and
that
quiet.
could have taken her
And
chose
somewhere,
instead to hold her
gathering
up.
dust in a
She
forgotten
realized she
the
could
reels
drift
of her
and still
first film
survive.
lay
It
still,
was a quiet
like
rebirth,
the girl she
a
once
baptism
was,
not of religion,
locked away,
but of resolve.
frame by frame.
She walked back onto the shore,
world didn't
soaked
forgive
and
easily.
shivering, but
When Bo Derek
changed.
returned to America
The broken
in
parts of her
1976,
hadn't vanished.
whispers had already turned to headlines.
They had hardened into
And the
something
girl who once
stronger.
chased waves
Every
now
bruise on
faced
her
a
heart,
storm of her own
every
making.
lonely night,
She was only
every
20,
unasked
newly
question
married
had
to
begun
the man
welding a
who had
spine of
first put her in
steel
front of a
beneath the
camera.
softness the world
But
would one day
that
worship.
union had come at a cost.
She watched the tide
John
sweep
Derek,
away her
nearly 30
footprints
years
and
her
understood
senior,
that
had
nothing
left
stayed.
behind his
Not
wife,
hurt,
beloved actress
not
Linda Evans,
love,
a woman
not
Bo
even
would
the
later
marks
call
she left
grace
behind.
itself.
Out
America
beyond the
turned its
horizon
gaze
lay
from
another
fascination
tide,
to fury.
one she couldn't
The
yet see,
tabloids screamed,
not made of
"Homewrecker."
water, but of light,
Directors stopped
lenses,
calling.
and
Even
expectations.
as she smiled for
That tide
photographs,
had a name,
she felt the weight
Hollywood.
of a scandal
It
she
came
was
to
too
her
young to
not with
understand.
cheers, but with the quiet
never
buzz
wanted to
of
hurt
studio
anyone,
lights
she
and the
would say
faint scent
softly,
of hairspray.
decades later.
The same
But
smell that had
sometimes
followed
love
her
doesn't
mother
look
home
like
for
salvation
years.
until
The
it's
girl
too late.
from Long Beach, who
Under
trusted
John's
waves
direction,
more than
Bo
people,
became his
now
vision
found
of
herself
purity and
standing
motion.
under
He
artificial
chose her
suns.
wardrobe, her
Their
hair,
brightness
even the way
scripted
she
and
exhaled on
controlled.
film.
It was
His camera
1973,
adored her, sculpting
and at
sunlight on her
16,
skin
Mary
until she looked
Kathleen
less like a
Collins
woman
still
and
carried
more
grains
like an
of
idea.
sand in the creases
The
of her
world began
skin,
to follow suit.
salt threaded in her
Magazine
hair.
covers called her
The ocean's
timeless,
rhythm lodged in her
flawless,
bones.
the dream.
Norma
But
brought her
behind
to
the
a
shimmer
film
of his
set.
art lay a
The
quieter
way
truth.
one might bring a daughter to a
frame carried his
workplace,
signature,
never quite
not hers.
realizing that
He
some
taught me how
doors
to be
once
seen,
opened
Bo said
never
years later,
close again.
never how to speak.
Inside, chaos
By the time she
and
turned
order
23,
collided.
her
Cameras
reflection
shifted
belonged
on
to
tracks.
everyone but herself.
Heavy cables
Then
curled like
came 10,
sleeping
the
snakes
film
across
that
the
turned a
floor.
quiet muse into
Voices
an immortal
rose
icon.
and fell in a language
was
of shots and
1979.
takes. Powder
Blake
floated
Edwards,
through the air,
searching for a
settling
woman the
like a
camera
fine
could fall in love
haze
with
over
before
the
it even
dream they
moved,
were building.
found her.
Kant.
Bo walked
She
into
had
the
wandered
audition
for
barefoot,
only a few minutes
sun-kissed,
when he noticed her.
apologizing for wasting his
John
time.
Derek was
Minutes
46,
later, she
sun-browned
walked out,
and
forever
composed.
changed.
A
When the
former
movie opened,
actor
the
who had
world
slipped
erupted.
behind the
Her
camera with the
cornrow
confidence of
braids sparked
someone
both fascination
who understood
and fury.
which
Her
angles hid
slow-motion
flaws
run
and
along
which
the
ones
Mexican
captured
shore
longing.
became a symbol
He
of
had a
beauty
photographer's
itself.
gaze, cool,
10 earned over
appraising,
$74 million,
devastatingly
and
focused.
Bo Derek became the
That
perfect
gaze
10,
landed on
the
Bo
unreachable
and did not
standard
look
of an
away.
entire
He
decade.
already
But fame
had a
is a mirror
home,
that
a
always
wife,
takes more than
a
it
life,
gives.
is wife.
know if they
Linda
loved me,
Evans
she
was
admitted,
beloved,
or
a
just the
star in
idea
her
of
own
me.
right,
more
luminous
perfect
in the
she
soft
appeared,
blue
the less
glow
human
of
she
television
felt.
sets across
Even her
America.
triumph carried guilt.
But in that crowded
Fame
set,
born from a
with
man's
its
loss
buzzing lights
and a
and
woman's
restless crew,
silence.
he
The
saw the
1980s were
teenager
supposed to be
standing
her
on the
reign,
edges
but
of the
they became
scene
her
and
reckoning.
imagined
A
possibility.
change of seasons
When he told
faltered.
her that her face
Tarzan,
belonged
the
in
ape
front
man,
of a
was
lens,
condemned as
the
soft
words
porn in
fell
the jungle,
over her like a
though it
spell.
opened #1
No
with
one had
$36
ever
million.
studied her like that.
Then came
As if she
Bolero,
were less a
film
person
John
and
promised
more
would
a
redefine
canvas waiting to be
sensuality.
painted. He
Instead,
spoke to
it
her
destroyed
with
them both.
subdued warmth,
Critics
the
called it a
practiced
cinematic
gentleness of
catastrophe.
a man who knew
It
his
made just
effect.
$8 million
He told
and
her
earned
she
her
had
the
something
humiliation
rare,
of being named
something
worst
that couldn't be
actress of the
learned.
decade.
For a girl who'd
That
spent
night,
her
when they
life
called her
feeling
name at the
invisible,
Razzies, the audience
those
laughed.
words burrowed
She
deep,
smiled anyway,
glowing in the
the way
dark
you smile at a
places she'd
funeral
never shown
when the
anyone.
body is your own. At
K.
least they remembered
He
me,
offered
she
more
whispered.
than flattery.
Each project left her
offered
emptier,
escape.
her beauty sharper,
A
her
part in
eyes
a
quieter.
film, a trip to Europe,
I thought we were making
a
art,
chance
she
to
said
step
later.
out of
But
the
somewhere along
salt-stained
the way,
backdrop of Long
I
Beach
became
and
the
into
art.
the stories
By
she'd
the
only
1990s,
watched
the
from the
goddess of the
outside.
1980s had
The
grown
project
tired of her
had a
pedestal.
title that sounded
In
like
Tommy
fate.
Boy,
Once upon a
1995,
love.
she turned her
When
own
she
myth
agreed,
inside out,
it wasn't just
playing
to a
the
job,
glamorous
it
stepmother
was
with a wink
to a
so
different
disarming,
life.
it
She
melted
didn't yet
decades of
understand
ridicule.
what it would cost.
The audience laughed with
Greece
her,
greeted her
not
like a
at her.
postcard too.
And for the first time
Beautiful
in years,
to be real.
it felt like
White
freedom.
walls thrown
They
against
called
blue
me the
skies.
perfect 10,
Olive
she would
trees
later
twisting
reflect.
in the wind.
But I was never
Water
chasing
so
perfection.
intensely turquoise
I was
it
just
seemed
learning to live
painted.
with the scars.
She left California
And in
as a
that revelation
teenager
lay her
with
quiet
classmates,
triumph.
hallways,
She had
and
survived
ordinary
what beauty
troubles.
couldn't
See,
protect her from.
she arrived on the
Now,
island
when
as
the
something
cameras
else
flash,
entirely,
she no longer never
An
flinches.
actress in the making.
The woman who once
The
embodied
focus of a
flawless
married
desire
man's
has become
fierce and
something
relentless
far rarer.
attention.
Hold.
Under the hot, unforgiving son.
What fame once
John
hardened.
began to shape her
The world
as
crowned her
carefully
for
as he
her
framed
perfection.
his shots.
But it was her
He directed her
fractures
not
that made
merely
her
in scenes,
unforgettable.
toe,
And though
but
the
in
man who built her
everything,
image
how to
continued
hold her
shaping her
head,
story,
how to move
what
her
he left
hands,
behind was no longer
when
a
to
portrait.
smile, and
It
when
was
to
a
let
woman
silence
finally free
speak
enough
for
to
her.
step out of the frame.
Don't act, he told her.
The golden cage that once
Just
crowned
exist.
her career had followed her
Let
home.
the camera come to
gleaming,
you. To a
silent,
girl, desperate
locked
to be
from
worth.
the inside.
The way he looked at her,
What had begun
obedience
as art
felt
had
like
become a
devotion.
life rehearsed.
For a while,
In that
it
house,
seemed like
nothing
freedom.
was ever out of
They
place.
worked,
Even
they
love
laughed,
seemed
tat.
lit from a single
They shared
angle.
a sun-drenched
John
fantasy
Derek,
that felt
the man who
removed
once
from the
promised her
world's
freedom
rules.
through film,
The sea
now
shimmered
directed
in the
her every
distance,
breath beyond
a
it.
familiar friend
He chose
watching
the
from
clothes she
afar,
wore, the
as
words
if
she
wondering
spoke,
whether she would
the light
recognize
that touched
danger
her
when it
face.
wore the face of love.
He taught me how
But
to
whispers
be seen,
travel
Bo
faster
would say
than
years
film
later,
reels.
but never how
Long
to
before
speak.
the production wrapped,
To the world,
rumors
they were a
began
fairy
to
tale.
swirl,
Beauty and her
crossing
sculptor,
oceans
muse
and picking up
master.
speed.
But inside
The
those
story
walls,
was too
time didn't
irresistible.
move.
A teenage
posed.
girl, a
Every
middle-aged
meal, every
director,
silence,
a
every
marriage
glance
waiting
was
back
perfectly
home.
composed,
By the
until
time
she
the
began
last
to
shot
forget
was
what
taken,
spontaneity
the
sounded
tale
like.
had already
She never
mutated
argued with
into
the
scandal.
headlines. She argued with
Reporters
herself.
hovered outside her
In the
mother's
still
house.
rooms of Santa Ynez,
Cameras
where the
pointed
scent
like
of grass mixed
accusations.
with the faint chemical
The
tang of
warmth,
old
once
film and
promised
fixer
by the
fluid,
lens, now
remorse
felt
clung
like
to the air
exposure.
like smoke
So,
that never cleared.
he took her further
Bo
away,
had learned that
out
guilt
of reach of
isn't
the
loud.
headlines
It
and the
whispers
law.
over and over
Promising
in
safety
the quiet
somewhere
hours
cold
between
and gray.
applause.
Germany did
She
not
could glide
glow.
through a Hollywood
Rain
gala
streaked the
with
windows
perfect
of their
poise.
small apartment,
Every gesture
turning the world
choreographed,
outside
every
into
smile
smeared
practiced
watercolor.
to the point of pain.
She
And
learned
still
new
feel
routines
something
there,
cracking
not
beneath
of a
the silk.
carefree starlet,
It wasn't
but
the
of
scandal
someone living a
itself that
life
reopened
too
the
big
wound.
for her years.
It was the knowledge
She
that
cooked
somewhere,
for two. She
another woman,
adjusted her
Linda
voice
Evans,
to a quieter
luminous
register,
and kind, had
careful,
once had to relearn
measured.
how to breathe in
She
a house
practiced
that no
lines
longer
for a
echoed
film
with her
that
own
would
laughter.
never be released.
Bo didn't
Its
wear
reels
that truth
stowed
like
away
armor.
in darkness.
She wore it like a
The story
bruise
they'd
that never
risked
healed.
everything to make locked
Some
in a
nights,
vault,
she'd
far
set
from the
2
place
plates on the
she'd
table
once
by
called
habit.
home.
Then pause.
Money ran
her hands
out.
trembling.
Projects
realizing
dissolved.
that for her to be
The
chosen,
romance that had
someone
sparked
else
in
had
Mediterranean
to disappear.
light now
Years later, when
existed
their
under
paths
skies
crossed
the
again,
color of metal.
the air itself
Some
seemed
nights
to hold
she
its
would
breath.
stare at her passport,
Linda arrived at the same
its
charity
pages
gala,
still damp
dressed in
from
white,
the hasty
her smile
departure from
radiant, her
California,
composure
ink
almost
blurred
cruel in its
where her
calm.
name had once been
cameras
crisp.
loved the image.
She thought
Two
of picking up the
beautiful women,
phone, of
unbroken,
calling Norma,
side by
of
side.
confessing that the
But under the
dream she
lights,
had
Bo
followed had
felt her
teeth
pulse
sharp enough
stutter.
to draw blood.
That smile,
But how do you
gentle,
explain that the
unshaken,
fantasy
wasn't
people envy
absolution.
has quietly
It was a
reshaped
mirror
into a
reflecting
cage?
everything she had taken
How do you
without
voice the
meaning to.
truth when you
The
can't
crowd
yet
saw
admit
grace.
it to yourself?
Bo saw
16.
consequence.
She was living
On
a
the drive
life
home,
that carried the
valley
fatigue of
stretched
someone
before her
twice
in
her
silver and
age,
shadow,
the
the
weight
headlights
of
carving
judgment,
through fog
of
like
gossip,
judgment.
of choices
In the
made
rearview
and
mirror,
bridges
she
burned,
saw not
pressed
the
down
icon
on her
the world
shoulders.
adored, but
When
a
she
woman
finally
hollowed
stood
out
before
by her
the
own
sea
choices.
again, it was
She
not the
whispered
warm
words
Pacific,
she had never been
but
brave
the
enough
colder
to say
waters
aloud.
of northern
I'm
Europe.
sorry
Ket.
for what my happiness
The
cost
ocean
you.
did not sing to
But
her
even
this time.
alone,
It
her voice
sighed.
faltered,
It
dissolving
mourned
before
debt,
it reached the air.
seemed to
As if
understand
forgiveness
that the
itself
girl who
refused to
once
come from her
found
lips.
salvation
In
in its
private,
waves
she tried
had
to
stepped
make
through a
amends in
doorway
ways no
she
one
could
would
never,
ever see.
completely
Anonymous
close
donations,
behind her.
gentle gestures,
When she eventually
compassion
returned
where once
to
there had been
the
silence.
United States
But
in
guilt is a patient
1976,
ghost.
the welcome
It
was
doesn't
not
leave
warm.
just because you
She was 20,
learn how to live with
newly
it.
married to the man who had
Sometimes,
first
when
lifted
the
a
house was
camera in
dark,
her direction.
and only the ticking
The
of the
man
old
who had
clock
walked
filled
away
the hall,
from Linda Evans
she
to
would
be with
wonder
her.
if Linda had
Tin.
truly moved
In
on,
another story,
or if
their union might
somewhere
have been
they were both
painted as
still
a grand
carrying
romance.
the same fracture
Cone.
from opposite sides
In
of the
this
same
one,
love.
it bore the stain
She
of
didn't need to
betrayal.
forgive me,
Headlines
Bo
did
would
not
later
spare
admit
her.
softly.
Cone.
Her grace
The label
was
followed
its own
her wherever
punishment.
she went. The
Bo
young
Derek was
woman
never
whose
the villain the
happiness had been
tabloids painted,
purchased
nor
with
the
another
saint her
woman's
defenders wished her
heartbreak.
to be.
The
She was
country
both,
that once
the
might
muse
have fallen
and the mirror,
simply
the
kin,
wound
in love
and the
with a new
scar.
starlet,
She had
now
lived
looked at
through
her
the
with
kind
narrowed
of love that burns
eyes.
too brightly
The
to last,
industry
leaving
hesitated.
beauty on
Some
the
doors
surface
that had been
and ash
opening
beneath.
quietly swung
To be
shut.
loved and
She
to have
stood
hurt someone
beside John, nearly
Both
3
were true,
decades older,
and both were hers to
established,
bear.
confident,
And perhaps
and
that
felt
is
the burn
why,
of a
when the
narrative
applause
she
finally
hadn't
faded
written,
and the
but
lights
now
dimmed,
had to live
she didn't
inside.
crumble.
Privately,
She simply
she
exhaled,
carried a different
at
ache.
last understanding
The knowledge that
survival
a
was
woman
not
she would
absolution,
later describe as
but
the
it was,
embodiment of
finally,
grace had
peace.
once had to gather
Beau and
herself
John
from the
never
ruins
had
of a
children.
shared life
Their love
and learn
filled
to stand
rooms that should have
alone.
echoed with laughter,
Under John's guidance,
replaced
Beau's
instead by the
public
low,
transformation
endless hum of his
continued.
editing
He
machines.
didn't just
The
direct
house
her
remained
movies.
spotless, echoing with
He
absence.
directed her image.
At the end of the hall were
He
two
chose
small
her
rooms
clothes,
meant for guests,
the way her hair
but she
fell,
sometimes caught
the
herself
tone of her
imagining
voice
them
in
filled with
interviews.
laughter
He
that never came.
lit her face in his
Instead,
photographs
they stored reels
until
of
she
film,
looked less like a
his,
person
of her.
and more like an ideal,
We lived
smooth,
in our own world,
luminous,
she once said,
untouchable.
and that
Magazines
was enough.
picked up his vision
Yet
and
some
amplified
nights,
it.
barefoot
They
and
called
sleepless,
her flawless,
pass his editing
timeless,
room.
a dream.
The soft
Her
flicker
beauty
of light
stopped
would spill
belonging
into
to
the
her the
hallway
moment it
as he
became an
replayed her
icon
image again
inside.
and again.
The truth was more
She would
fragile.
pause at the doorway,
Each time a
watching him
flash
watch
went
her,
off,
realizing
she felt
with
a
a
little
quiet
more
ache
erased.
that she had given life
The
to his
world
art,
wasn't applauding
but
the
none to
girl
her
who
own.
had survived
The
divorce,
sound of the film projector
loneliness,
became the pulse
and
of
the
their
cold
marriage,
apartments
steady,
of foreign cities.
mechanical,
It
endless.
was applauding a projection
become both
crafted
muse
by
and
someone
mirror,
else's hands.
existing only in the
She
spaces
had
where
been
his
taught how
imagination
to be
placed
looked
her.
at, how
Love
to
began to
occupy
feel
a
like a
frame
role I
with
could never
dizzying
stop
perfection.
playing,
No one
she
had taught
reflected.
her how to claim a
And when the
voice of
projector
her own.
finally stopped,
By the time she
the
reached
silence felt
23,
unbearable.
her reflection
Years
felt like
blurred
borrowed
together.
property.
She stood by
The
him
image
through
the
the
world
ridicule,
worshipped
through the
didn't
films
match the
that
woman
flopped,
she felt herself
through the
to
laughter
be.
of critics who called
That
her
was when
his
10
creation.
arrived. The
And
film
when
that
his
would
health
stamp
began
her
to
into
fail in the
cultural
late
memory
1990s,
forever.
Beau
Co-released
stayed,
in
nursing him as
1979
tenderly as
under
she
the
once
direction
obeyed him.
of Blake Edwards.
The man who had once
It told
shaped
one
every frame
story
of her
on
life
screen,
now
see,
struggled to hold
and
a glass
another,
of water.
far more
The
enduring
house
one
filled
off
with
it.
the sound of
The
oxygen,
story of how a single
footsteps in
performance
slippers,
can
of
become a
devotion,
symbol.
stripped of glamour.
She auditioned barefoot,
He had always told
sun-kissed,
me what to do,
apologizing
she said once,
for taking
but in
up
the
the
end,
director's
he only
time.
needed me to stay.
Within minutes,
When
it
his
was
heart
clear
finally
to
gave
everyone
out
in the
May
room that she
1998,
wasn't
she
wasting
held his
anything.
hand until it grew
There was
still.
something about the
The
way
man
she
who had built her
moved,
legend was
the way
gone,
she
and
occupied
with him
space
went
without
the only
forcing
world
it,
she had
that
known
made
since she
cameras
was
lean
16.
toward her.
That
When
night,
the film
she
finally
wandered through
reached
their silent
theaters,
home,
audiences
past
around
the
the
cameras,
world
the
felt it
portraits,
too.
the
Slow motion
reels of
run
film
along the
gathering
Mexican
dust.
shore.
In the
Her hair
all-white
in tight
editing
braids
room,
and
the
beads
machine
clicking
still sat
softly
open, a
became
half-finished
imprinted
scene
on the
frozen
collective
on the frame.
imagination.
For a moment,
Her look
she
sparked
almost reached out to
fascination
turn it
and
off,
controversy,
but didn't.
admiration
I
and
thought I would feel
critique
free,
in equal
she
measure.
said later,
The
but I
box
just
office
felt
numbers
empty.
climbed past
When
$74
morning
million,
came, she opened the curtains.
and with them,
The light
her
fell
name
differently
surged
now,
into places she had
warmer,
never imagined
gentler,
it could go.
no longer
The
staged.
world decided she was
For the
the
first time,
perfect 10.
she realized she
A number
didn't know
became
what to
her
do with
crown and her
The
cage
woman
at
the
once.
world once called perfect
Perfection,
finally
once simply
understood
a word
that perfection
tossed
is
around
just
by
another kind of
magazines,
prison.
hardened
Polished,
into expectation.
but airless.
Everywhere she went,
She had spent
people
half her
looked
life
at her
inside
as
someone
if she were
else's
not
vision.
human,
Loved
but a
deeply,
standard.
but never
Secretly,
freely.
she
And
wrestled
yet,
with a
even in
quieter
loss,
question.
She refused bitterness.
Did anyone truly
He
see
spoke
her,
of John with
or
tenderness,
did they only
not
see the
regret.
dream projected
He
onto
made
her
me
skin?
who I am,
Q.
she said.
She
for
could
better
charm
or
a
worse.
room, light up a
The world
screen,
saw a muse
stop
who
strangers
survived her maker.
mid-sentence. But at
those
night,
who listened closely
when the makeup was
heard
gone
something
and the
quieter.
lights were off,
A woman
doubt
learning to
curled up
exist
beside
without
her
direction,
like a familiar
to love
shadow.
without
They
guilt,
cheered for her.
to breathe her
They
own
envied
air.
her.
Somewhere in that
They
golden
tried to
cage,
become her.
the door
Tip.
had always
But the
been
more
open.
adored she was,
It just took loss
the more
for her to
distant
step
she
through
felt
it.
from herself.
For 3 quiet
The
years
number that
after John
defined
Derek's
her
passing,
was never hers
Beau
to
lived
choose,
alone with her
and,
memories,
in the
until
spaces
laughter
between
returned
applause,
in the most unexpected
in the fragile
way.
moments
She
when
hadn't
all
been
that
looking for it.
remained was the
She
sound
hadn't
of
been
her
looking
own
for
breathing
anyone.
in a quiet
But
house,
grief has a
she
way of softening
began
even the
to
walls
understand
we
a
build
cruel
around ourselves.
truth. The world might have
2002,
fallen in love
after
with
years
an
of
image
saying
of
no,
her,
she
but
finally
few
said
had
yes
taken the time
to a
to love
blind
the
date
woman
arranged by
underneath.
friends
Comment
who refused
68.
to let her fade into
Or write
solitude.
Rip Bo Derek
He was
as a
John
symbolic
Corbett,
tribute
5 years
to
younger,
honor her
an
journey.
actor with a soft voice and a
Even as she
smile that didn't
continues
reach
to
for
walk
anything.
this world with
She
grace.
expected another polite dinner, another evening of
Fame
small
has a
talk.
way of wrapping itself
Instead,
around a
she found a
person
man
like
who didn't
silk,
fill the air with
smooth
his
at
own
first,
stories. He listened.
intoxicating even,
He talked about
until one
dogs,
day it
about getting
tightens
nervous
just
before
enough to
every
remind
roll,
you it can
about
also
growing
strangle.
tomatoes that never turned
In the
red.
years after 10,
He didn't
Bo
see me
Derek's
as
life
Bo
glittered
Derek,
on the
she
outside,
said. He saw
framed
me
by
as a
premieres,
person.
photo
For
shoots,
the first time
and
in
magazine
years,
spreads
she wasn't
that
being
declared
watched.
her the
She
ultimate
was
fantasy.
being understood.
The world saw a
That
goddess
night, when she
carved
came
from
home,
sunlight.
the silence of
She
the
saw
house didn't
something
hurt
far
as
more
much.
complicated in the
Somewhere
mirror.
between the past and the
A
present,
young woman aging
something
in dog
small and
years,
fragile began
trying
to
to
breathe
keep
again.
pace with an image
Their
she
love
never
didn't
asked
burn,
to become.
it settled.
Her marriage
It grew
to John
not in grand
Derek was a
gestures or
world
headlines,
unto itself,
but in the quiet
sealed
repetition of
tightly
days.
from outside
He never
influence.
asked her to be a
Key.
symbol.
He
didn't
kept their
direct her,
circle small,
didn't control her,
their home quiet,
didn't need her to be
their
perfect.
world tightly
Instead,
controlled.
he made room for her
Most
laughter,
didn't
her
realize how little
hesitations,
space there
her
truly was
silences.
for her
They
inside of
rode
it.
horses at dawn,
She
cooked
admired
simple
him,
dinners,
his
and fell
artistry,
asleep
his
watching old
confidence,
westerns,
his
the
ability
kind
to
where
command
no
a
one
room.
needed saving.
But
He makes me
pre-baderation
laugh every
slowly
day,
shifted
she said
into
once.
dependency,
And after everything I've
and
been through,
dependency grew
that's really
roots
all I
so
need.
deep she
It
mistook
wasn't the
them
fairy
for
tale the
devotion.
tabloids once imagined.
John didn't raise
It
his
was something
voice.
gentler,
He didn't
something
have to.
real. With
Silence
him,
can be a
love
form of
wasn't a
possession
performance.
too.
It was
He
a place to
directed her
rest.
through life the
He
same
gave me
way.
what no one else
He
ever
directed
did,
her on
she
screen.
reflected.
Turn your
Permission
head this
to
way.
simply exist.
Smile like that.
When people
Hold
asked
still.
why they hadn't
Don't
married,
change.
she'd smile.
Don't grow. Stay
We don't
mine.
need a ceremony
Stay
to feel
perfect.
committed.
And she
And for nearly
tried.
2 decades,
She tried
that
so
was
hard.
enough.
But
2
perfection
souls
is a
who had already
prison
learned what it
disguised
meant
as praise.
to lose everything
A
and
Hollywood
still choose
mirage.
tenderness.
The roles that
But
followed
love,
10
when it's real,
should have been stepping
doesn't ask for
stones to an
perfection.
expansive
It
career,
asks for
but they
presence.
instead became
In
echoes of the
2020,
image
after
built
18
for her.
years together,
The
they
seductive
quietly
ingenue,
exchanged vows at
the
home.
unreachable
No
beauty,
photographers,
the silent
no
center
scripts,
of
no
other
diamonds,
people's
just
fantasies.
2 people in their
Films
60s,
like Tarzan,
saying yes
The Ape
to
Man,
peace.
1981,
It just felt
kept
right,
her in
she
the
said.
spotlight,
After
but
all
also
these
kept
years,
her typecast.
It already was what it was
Each
supposed
script
to be.
seemed written
On
more
their
for
ranch
the
in
idea of
California,
her than the
time now
reality.
moves gently.
Critics sharpened
Mornings
their
begin with
pens.
the soft
They
knickers
wrote
of
about her
horses,
body as
afternoons
if it
with
were a
volunteering
public
for
commodity,
veterans and rescued
dissecting,
animals,
comparing,
evenings by the fire
judging.
with coffee
It was
and
a
laughter.
strange, lonely
The same
kind of
woman who
fame,
once lived in the
adored
blinding light of
universally,
cameras now finds beauty in
understood
the
by
ordinary.
almost no one.
Mud on
Her
her
fans
boots,
saw
the
magic.
weight of a sleeping
Her
dog
critics
across her
saw
lap,
a product.
the sound
Her
of
husband
John's
saw a
quiet humming from
masterpiece
another
he
room.
created. But
I
wherein all
don't
of that
chase
was
perfection
Bo,
anymore, she
behind
said.
closed doors,
I just chase
behind
peace.
the glamour, was
And
a
yet,
marriage that
even
grew
peace
heavier with
has
each
its
passing
shadows.
year.
Bo and
The
John
world
never had
portrayed
children,
them as a passionate
not by
Hollywood
choice,
love
but
story.
by time's quiet
But those who
design.
looked closely
Sometimes
saw
she would
something
pause
else.
in the hallway,
A man
the
who had
house filled
shaped
with the
3
sound of
wives
wind
into
and
his
nothing
vision
else,
of beauty,
and imagine
each
what
younger
laughter
than
might
the
have sounded
last,
like there.
each molded under
But
his
then
direction.
she'd look at the
Bo
animals
was
she
not
cared
allowed
for,
to age,
at
at
the
least
people
not
she helped,
visibly. Aging
at the
meant
world
slipping
she
out
still
of the
had,
mold he had
and
crafted,
understand.
losing the thing he had
Motherhood
hung
isn't
his
always
legacy
about
on.
birth.
He
It's about what you
photographed her
nurture.
constantly,
I never
sometimes
became a mother,
tenderly,
she once said.
sometimes
But I think I
obsessively,
still learned
chasing youth
how to
through
love
his lens,
like one.
as if he could freeze
perhaps
time
that is the
with
quiet
each
miracle
shutter
of her
click.
story.
See,
After
she
decades
learned
of
to
being
mask
shaped,
her emotions
photographed,
the way her mother
adored,
had
and
once
judged,
masked
Bo
actresses'
Derek found a
flaws,
love that asked
gently,
for nothing but
invisibly,
honesty.
without
The woman
protest.
once worshipped as a
But
perfect
years
10
of hiding
now
leaves
lives under
fingerprints.
no one's light
The
but her
silence
own.
between them grew
Her
thick
story no
and
longer
brittle,
ends in tragedy.
and her heart,
It ends in
once so
stillness,
eager to
in
please,
sunlight,
began to
in the tender
fracture
truth
in
that
quiet
even after the
ways.
fiercest storms,
The illusion
the
cracks
heart
fate,
never forgets
however,
how to
does
begin
not
again.
bow to control.
Now,
In
at 68,
1998,
Bo
John
Derek lives
Derek
the kind of
collapsed
life that
suddenly
once seemed
from cardiac
impossible
arrest.
for a woman who had
The
known
man
so
who had
much
defined defined her
noise.
world for more
The
than
world
2
that once
decades
judged her
was
by the
gone
curve
in
of
an
her
instant.
smile now
The
sees
house
her
felt
through a different
strangely
lens,
enormous in
that
the
of
hours
quiet
after,
strength,
every room
compassion,
echoing with
and
the
grace.
absence of his
Her net
voice.
worth
Sin.
today is
And she
estimated at
felt
around
something
$40
she
million,
hadn't expected.
a fortune built
Not freedom,
from relentless
not
hustle,
relief,
but from
not
decades
even
of
grief.
reinvention,
Alone,
resilience, and wisdom.
but a strange mixture
Much of
of
it
all
stems
three,
from the films that
a
made her a
cocktail of
household name,
emotions
her
she
enduring
couldn't
brand
untangle.
work, and
A
careful
realization
investments.
that she was now
But a part
both
of her wealth
unmoored
also
and
carries the
unburdened.
quiet legacy of her
For the
late
first
husband,
time since
John
she was
Derek.
16,
He
the
left her
world
not
felt
only
wide.
memories and film
She
reels,
stood at the
but
edge
also
of
a
that
foundation,
expanse,
both
stunned,
emotional and
unsure how
material,
to step into
on
it.
which she would build
Who
her
was
new
she
life.
without him?
Her
What
home
did
in
she
Santa
love?
Ynez,
What did she
California,
want?
is less a
Did she
mansion
even
than a
know?
sanctuary.
At
A living
41,
portrait of
she
serenity,
understood something she
framed by
had
the
never
golden
had the
hills of the
space to
Central
acknowledge.
Coast.
She
The property
had
spans
lived
over
more
80
than
acres,
half her life
a
in
quiet
someone
empire
else's
of
reflection.
vineyards, oak groves,
Now
and
she
horse
had to learn
pastures,
to live
where
in her
time
own.
seems to walk barefoot.
Rebirth. The
At its
rebirth
heart
came slowly,
stands her Spanish
like
style
dawn
ranch
creeping
house,
across a
nearly
quiet
5,000
beach.
square feet of
It wasn't
sun-washed
dramatic.
adobe and terracotta,
It wasn't
with
glamorous.
wide verandas
It was
and
small
arching
things.
corridors that open
Walking
toward the
her
valley
dogs
light.
at sunrise,
The courtyards
laughing
bloom
without
with
fear
lavender
of
and
being
wild
observed,
roses.
choosing
air
her
thick
own
with the
clothes,
scent of hay and
sitting
salt
in silence
carried
without
inland
waiting
from
to
the
be
Pacific.
told what to do,
Inside, there
feeling
are no
the
movie
wrinkles at
posters
the
or
corners
framed
of her
magazine
eyes
covers.
and letting them
Only
stay.
photographs of
Then,
horses mid-gallop,
unexpectedly,
dogs asleep
love
by the
arrived,
fire, and
gentle,
sunsets she once
patient,
tried to
and
capture
nothing
on an
like
old
what
film
she had
camera.
known before.
The
Came
rooms feel lived
in the form of
not
actor
staged.
John Corbett.
A leather armchair worn
He didn't
soft
want to
by
direct
years of
her.
reading.
He didn't
A
want to
long
change her.
farmhouse table
He
where
didn't
friends
want
and
to
neighbors
possess
gather
her.
for dinner
He just
beneath
wanted
hanging
to walk
vines of
beside her.
bougainvillea.
For a woman
On
who
one
had
wall,
spent her
there's a
entire
black and white
youth
portrait
being
of John
sculpted,
Derek,
shaped,
quietly
and
tucked
framed,
between two
this was
landscape
revolutionary.
paintings, not as an
Their
idol, but
relationship
as a
would
memory.
last 20 years
house
before
itself
they
reflects her
quietly
soul.
married in 2020.
Refined, but unpretentious.
A union built
not to
not on
impress,
spectacle,
but to endure.
but on the calm,
Out back,
steady
the
rhythm
stables
of
house a dozen
authenticity.
horses, many of them
She finally
rescues.
found the
Their
one thing
stalls
she had been
spotless,
denied for
the air
decades,
filled with
a
soft
life that
whinnies
belonged
and
to
the rustle
her.
of hay.
The woman
The
she
barn
became
opens
today,
into open
at
paddocks,
68.
where she still rides at
Bo
dawn,
Derek
her
is
hair
no
loose,
longer the
her
girl
laughter
running down a
startling the
beach
mourning
in
doves
slow
from the
motion,
fences.
and thank
Her
God for
life
that.
now moves at the rhythm
She has
of the
evolved
land.
into something
She owns
far more
several
powerful
vehicles,
than an
though none
icon,
are
a
extravagant.
survivor,
A vintage
a
silver
reclaimed
Mercedes
self,
SL
a
convertible
woman
she
who
rarely
stepped
drives,
out
a Ford
of the shadows
F-250
of
truck for
celebrity
hauling
and
feed
learned
and
to
supplies,
stand in her own
and
light.
an electric
Tosi.
SUV, she jokes,
She advocates for
is the only
disabled
thing in Hollywood
veterans.
that doesn't run
She
on
fights
drama.
for animal welfare.
The value of her ranch
She
and
raises
assets
horses,
combined is
protects
estimated to
wildlife,
exceed $10 million,
and lives away from the
a
spotlight
significant
by
part of her
choice,
$40 million
not by
net
exile.
worth.
Her
But to
beauty
her,
no longer
the land
defines her.
means more than the
Her
numbers.
story does.
It's
And
not
it's a
what
hell
it's
of a
worth,
story.
she once said.
One of strength,
It's what it gives
silence, survival,
back. The ranch
and the
sustains
long,
itself
slow
through
journey
grapes,
back to
through
herself.
horses,